You want to create a high trust, high engagement workforce. You want to be an inclusive leader. Your intentions are good. You care deeply. You are trying really hard, but somehow trust continues to erode. Engagement is dropping. Your team feels the opposite of what you meant to create.
Culture work is people, not law-centric. Leaders are worried about the risk to their reputation. The hidden strengths are the places where you think you are less strong than your team experiences you.
You want to create a high trust, high engagement workforce. You want to be an inclusive leader. Your intentions are good. You care deeply. You are trying really hard, but somehow trust continues to erode. Engagement is dropping. Your team feels the opposite of what you meant to create. What's going on? And how do you stop that downward spiral at a time that feels like you really have no bandwidth and no time to be intentional? Today, I'm hoping to give you a new perspective for understanding what's actually happening and what to do about it. Hi, it's Dr. Mira Brancu, and welcome back to the Hard Skills. Today, I'm excited to welcome Valerie Zolezzi-Wyndham. Valerie is an expert in inclusive leadership, organizational culture, and the psychology of leadership behavior change, with over 20 years of experience spanning law, healthcare, banking, and distribution across Mexico and in the United States. She is a trusted advisor to C-suite executives. She specializes in closing the intention-action gap, the space where good leadership and intentions break down and silently harm teams and cultures. And she created the Promoting Good framework, which applies science-based methodologies to improve workplace engagement, productivity, and trust. She's also co-founder of Casita Cultura Latina, a nonprofit amplifying Latino art and culture, and serves on boards across banking, health, and philanthropy. A proud Mexican immigrant, Valerie holds a BA from Boston College and a JD from Boston University School of Law. So, welcome to the show, Valerie.
Thank you for having me. I was excited for this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Excellent. So, I remember when we connected, it was at a talk that you gave on a panel for the Society of Psychologists in Leadership. And I was just so moved and interested by how you reconceptualized how to connect with leaders right now in times when it's really hard to have conversations about DE&I. It's really hard to have conversations where people don't feel on edge, and how to sort of like shift the conversation in a way that feels embracing in some ways. At least that's how I defined it and how I felt. So I'd like to, though, first start with how you built your career initially. You're a lawyer by training, and now you specialize in the psychology of leadership behavior change. So I'm super interested to hear about how you got from your legal background to how you think now about your approach to leadership and what you're doing.
It's a great question. And I think I'll start by saying I practiced law for 17 years, and I practiced law in a very specific context. So I worked at a nonprofit law firm. All of our clients were families with low incomes, elders, and every attorney who worked in that practice, cared about justice, cared about our client communities, and valued justice. And it was a wonderful place to work, and our clients were fabulous. And still in that place, even though everybody, and I do believe this, everyone who worked there wanted to be inclusive, they weren't. And I think what I want to say about lawyers, and this is a generalization, I can say this as a lawyer, although now a lawyer in recovery, lawyers are by education and sometimes ego, and also values blinders, bad leaders. Right there. And I think as employment lawyers it's especially hard for them to be good leaders.
How that's so ironic.
It's so ironic. And I think it emerges because I think they're you think that because you know the law around employment that you're going to know how to lead people, but the law doesn't lead people. And so what I like to say is that on the best day, the law prevents illegal activity. Even on the best day, law doesn't build culture. Culture work is people, not law centric. And it's a lawyer's instinct to approach leading people and building teams, thinking about what isn't lawfully permissible, instead of by asking the question, what is it that our teams deserve? How will they thrive? And so this law first approach, which is, it's so deeply ingrained in our training, it falls short.
Yeah. And what I'm also sort of reflecting on is many people, even outside the law, lean too heavily on legal and regulatory requirements to lead,
Yes.
when in fact that's, yeah. So go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point you're making is really important. And what I'm saying a lot right now to boards and to CEOs is that, a lawyer has a risk assessment job, right? A lawyer's job is to assess the risk and then to advise the leader, who then needs to decide how much risk they are going to bear.
Mhm.
And but the law itself shouldn't be the baseline, right, by which we're deciding the strategy of an organization, whether it's our people strategy or our marketing strategy or our sales strategy. I'm never intending to say that anyone should be violating the law. That's not what I'm talking about. But the law is one factor among many. And so a leader needs to hear from the lawyer what the legal risks are, hopefully is hearing also what the reputational risks are from others. And I think right now this is one of those challenges. If you're only listening to the lawyer who's not thinking about the reputational harm to moving back these commitments, you're not thinking about your other risk factors. And that's evident in the Target Costco dynamic. I know we're going to talk later about courage, but I think it's a safe bet to just follow the advice from a lawyer, but it's really up to the CEO to decide, what are all of the risks and how much risk am I willing to bear?
Yeah. And also, like, in what you're saying, there's a level of how much self protection do you need before you end up breaking trust with people? That's kind of what I'm hearing. It's making me remember a story that a friend once shared, where her employer, for it was a small practice. They were, working together for a very long time. I mean, years. And at some point, the employer realized that she couldn't afford to keep this friend of mine. And unfortunately, the way that she let her go was clearly something based on what she got using legal advice. So she basically cut off all access to everything before she called, my friend into the room and said, "I'm letting you go." And it was such a shock and so hurtful and broke trust immediately. And it was not necessary, but I think the employer was so nervous that
Mm.
she was leaning too heavily on the self-protection or the legal advice, instead of what I'm hearing you say is like, there's another piece to this. There's multiple pieces to this with the team part.
Correct. And I think, I mean, leaders are worried about the risk to their reputation. They're worried about, they want to do it correctly. They have boards who are looking down on them. And so I understand the temptation. And I mean, I seek legal advice often because a lawyer should never advise themselves. But I think we have to remember that the legal advice is only part of the work that a leader has to do. And so you should get advice about how to properly hire somebody, how to properly let somebody go. And then you also have to stop and think, and this is where the leadership work really lies. What is my relationship with the human being who is in front of me going to look like after I do X, Y, or Z? And how can I protect that? And also have the law present, but not to lead with the law only. I think that is where the more that I saw that gap, and also the more that I saw my clients not feeling like the law was providing them with justice. the more that I realized that that wasn't the kind of work that I wanted to be doing, that the solutions my clients were actually looking for was a culture that felt fair. It wasn't, that a law not have been violated. It is, they were seeking respect in the workplace. And I came to realize that's the problem that I wanted to solve. And the law doesn't solve that problem.
Mm. So then, how do you imagine leaders combining having the knowledge or leaning on the legal side that is important and, self-protective and protective of the organization with that relational human trust building side?
Yeah. I mean, I think leaders should spend time building relationships with their teams and understanding what motivates people. They should spend time understanding, what would make the work environment, the team, the workplace, a place where these employees want to be, and then seek legal counsel to make sure that, what is built in a workplace exceeds the law,
Mm,
but
mm.
they should be building something, the law should be the floor. And then there should be, the garden that goes from it. And so I think the leadership work is really in, what does the garden look like that our teams are working in? And so both of them have to go hand in hand. And it's about collaboration. It's about mutual understanding. And I think from a performance perspective, because in this conversation, we've been talking mostly about making sure that you're protecting your organization from legal risks, but we also should be setting up our teams and our organizations to ensure that people are productive and contribute and that your outcomes are met. And that is about, how are you empowering? How are you equipping your team to work at their best? And none of that work is about what the legal minimums are. That's about, I don't want, that isn't about the pool table. And it is in part about how the vacation time that you give, but really it's about, how is it that you're showing your employees through your policies, through their benefits, but also through the relationships and the ecosystem that you provide for them, that this is a place where they want to contribute their best and feel motivated to give that to the company.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that you've been, speaking about is the intention action gap. What is this leadership gap that you've noticed?
So the leadership gap, I'm going to start by qualifying this. People who reach out to Promoting Good to work with us are a self-selected group of people who, at a minimum, are interested in creating inclusive cultures and in, leading from that place. We're not serving organizations that are not interested in this, or leaders who aren't motivated by these values that we have.
There's no intention. So there's no intention action gap.
Correct. That's absolutely right. I meet every day leaders whose intentions, when they share them with me, are good, and who I believe when they tell me that they want their workplace to be a place where everyone who they hire has a good experience. And then when we talk a little bit further, or when I talk to other people who are in that space, they tell me that they're not experiencing that intention because either the actions of the leader or the actions of the team or the systems that are in place aren't actually providing that experience to employees. And so that's what the intention action gap. On an individual leader level, it could look like, and this happened to me last week. I was talking to somebody who told me that humility was the most important leadership competency. And humility is one of our 8 leadership traits that are in our validation assessment. And then proceeded in the next 30 minutes to show me how they didn't lead with humility. That's the
Oh,
action gap. And I think often what we see is that the leader doesn't understand what's happening that's causing the employee to have an experience that doesn't align. And and it happens for a lot of reasons. The leaders are busy, or they have power no one wants to tell them, because you don't want to tell the boss that their actions don't match their intentions. But there is an impact that happens on the team that slows the team down, that hurts productivity. And so I am very interested in solving that disconnect for leaders who have good intentions and who don't want the hurt. Because often what I hear when I work with leaders is, how hard it feels to hear that their teams don't believe their intentions because that's not the experience they have. And so I see my job as helping that leader to fulfill their potential as a leader so that employees who are in that workplace experience the promise that leader is making. Because when we make a promise, when we announce our intentions and then we don't follow through, a promise is being broken and that breaks trust.
Yeah, yeah. What do you see as the challenge to turning that intention into the right action that is visible or experienced?
So, there's a few challenges. I would have said before the chaos that we're experiencing right now that the challenge was that the systems that exist in our workplaces are operating in a way that creates different experiences for people, and that there is systems work to understand where the gaps are and to make improvements. That work had started, and there are some organizations that are still moving forward with that work, and some of that work has stalled. So that's a challenge. I think another challenge is that there is such a pressure to move fast. There is such a pressure to move to results, in the
Yeah.
tech space, in the healthcare space. There is so much work to be done that everybody is moving really, really fast. And science tells us that when we are moving fast, we are most likely to act on our instincts. And that means we're most likely to act on our bias. And so then we do things that have an impact that we don't want. Or for folks who are, in research and development or creating products, if we don't pause before we get started and we build, and we don't invite people to the table who could tell us that we've forgotten to build for this other group, then we've put in all this effort. And so then when somebody stops us 6 months later to tell us that we forgot about somebody, it feels like they are criticizing our work and we take it personally. And then it's really hard to make a change because you've already promised to deadlines. And so the work that needs to happen is to build systems and to build pauses in that are going to help you along the way of your work match those actions to your intentions, not in a one-off way, but in a systematic way that produces a sustained and reliable experience.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is like part of what is necessary with your help is to figure out how to extract yourself from taking it personally and to recognize all of the different systems that are making it really hard to actually live out the intention. And I'm curious, is that part of your promoting good methodology? If so, tell us more about that methodology.
Sure. We are a diagnosis first firm. And when I say that, right, and then a solution second, our solutions are leadership, culture, and systems solutions. And we have clients who come to us sure that they understand the problem that needs to be fixed. And when I first launched my firm 8 years ago, I would hear from the client that this was the problem, and we'd get to work solving that problem. And then, once you're in the organization with them, you realize, they don't really understand the problem that they have.
Yeah.
They're,
Yep.
that's a Band-Aid approach that's not going to be sustainable. And so all of our work starts with a diagnosis. And if you're not willing to do that with us, we're not going to be able to partner because we have had the experience of, and it's not a matter of trust, it's that our clients don't necessarily know how to diagnose the real problem. Or they're hearing something and it sounds right. And so that's what they want to solve for. When it is, we fail and our clients fail if we go in to solve a problem and then don't address the issue that employees feel exists. Trust gets broken in that process. And then the work isn't successful and that hurts everybody. And I think in part, some of what has happened in the DI field, has been that some of the work hasn't been done in a way that is sustainable. And so we learned very early on that we had to start with a diagnosis because that's what was going to set folks up for success. So we start with the diagnosis, and the diagnosis is about the organization. It's also about leaders, but it's about employees too. And providing that organization level assessment also allows us to speak about the challenges that an organization faces in a depersonalized way that really is about, what are the challenges at an organizational level? What are the improvements that we can make? And it is no longer personal, right? It's not about a bad actor. And that also helps leaders to be able to understand, listen, hear the feedback, and then participate in looking for solutions. And then we'll go into solve, and we have some frameworks that we use. So we do have a behavioral change framework that is called the equity pause, that is a practice that helps us in that moment stop ourselves before our actions don't match our intentions. We've built a validated leadership assessment, which measures the 8 traits of an inclusive leader. That helps our leaders who we're partnering with to understand the disconnect, right, between how they think they show up as leaders and how their employees experience them. And then, of course, we go in and support organizations in building the systems or rebuilding the systems that they need. So that's the work that we do. We do it across a number of sectors. And we see change happen as we work with our clients. Because I think once leaders understand that their people experience them in a different way and the employees note that change, they get a boost of confidence and then they want to do it again. So it's good work.
Yeah. I would love to get into the 8 elements of inclusive leadership. But before we do that, can you give an example of a situation where someone came to you assuming it was one issue, and then you did this diagnosis and you realized it was something different or something fuller or deeper or something that was surprising, maybe? And just kind of walk us through the start to finish story of what this could look like.
Sure. So here's an example. So we have a client who believed that the challenge their organization was facing was a gap in leadership skill, right? So they believed that the challenge that they had was that their leaders didn't have the leadership competencies to supervise folks and to build trust.
Which is a very common assumption that we hear often when people reach out to consultants and coaches. So that's a very helpful example. Okay.
And what we discovered was, it was still in the leadership space, but there were actually some leaders that were leading really well. But there was an inconsistency in the leadership that was being experienced across the organization in different parts of the organization. And so you were either really lucky because you had a leader, who was providing you with the experience that you wanted. But if you were somewhere else with a leader who didn't have that capacity, then you were having a very different experience. And so the churn sort of across different teams was really different. And it also meant that the organization had a really good reputation with a certain type of workforce and not a great reputation with another type of workforce. So the challenge wasn't an individual leader problem. It was that there wasn't a system for how middle managers lead across the organization. There weren't expectations around, these are your responsibilities as a leader. And so that inconsistency was hurting employees, but it was also hurting leaders. Because there was sort of this assumption, right, that folks would just figure it out. And some were figuring it out and others weren't. And so there was a lack of fairness that was experienced in that organization at multiple levels. So we helped them build some protocols that were shared, and we helped them do some leadership development and build a community. I think it's leadership ecosystems where leaders are learning together and practicing, and peer-to-peer solving and collaborating around leadership can be really, really powerful.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. And then you're not alone. You're not isolated. You don't start feeling like an imposter or that you're missing something that somebody else got, so there is that fairness issue as well. So now I'd love to hear, I'm assuming maybe you were thinking and including some of those 8 principles, inclusive leadership principles. I'd love to hear what those are.
Sure. So our 8 leadership principles are, and we worked with the Bridgify Institute to create our validated assessment. So they are commitment, they are conscientiousness, they are humility, they are empathy, they are collaboration, they are courage and curiosity and flexibility. And all of them are important, and and we are likely to be good at a few of them, and to not be as good at as others. And I think one of the most powerful things that we have seen in terms of the impact on people who are taking our assessment is when they discover the power of their hidden strengths. So you can take our assessment either as a self-assessment or as a 360. When you take it as a 360, you notice the differences, obviously, between how people rank you and yourself. The hidden strengths are the places where you think you are less strong than your team experiences you. And and when you were speaking earlier about this, this feeling that we have that we're not good enough, the imposter syndrome, right? When we discover that people actually believe we are more courageous than we are, or more curious than we are, it allows us to harness that skill to improve in some areas where maybe we don't have where we're not perceived as having that same strength.
Yeah. Have you found that any of these are harder than others to build, like across many leaders, like any of them more challenging than another?
I mean, I think that conscientiousness and commitment are hard. And I think they're hard because so much of how you are perceived is also about, what people who you are working with want to experience, what their traumas are. And so you have to be a very good communicator to have your commitment and your conscientiousness match the actions that folks are looking for. And so unless you're also doing work with a leader, with a leadership team around communication as an inclusion strategy, it's going to be really hard to make impact there.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you mentioned commitment because I was curious how you define that and what does it look like?
So, commitment is about, if I say that I am an inclusive leader, are you experiencing that commitment in our relationship?
Mhm,
That's sort of
mhm.
we conscientiousness, which is similar, that's really about the consistency with which I'm practicing that commitment. And so they are connected a bit. And so most of our traits we tend to pair with another. There's a lot of gray in this leadership work.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I'm also curious, are any of them ones where more often than not, leaders think they're great at, but they actually are not?
Yeah. I think empathy and courage are often misdiagnosed. Also, I will say that humility is also up there. I think people are pretty accurate at predicting how flexible they are or not, but I think empathy, courage, and humility are hard. We think we are more than we actually are.
Yeah, yeah. Let's dig into some of those.
Yep.
Empathy is the one that I reflected on when I met you. It is the one where, you helped me really question whether I was being empathetic um, towards leaders that, in my opinion, were not displaying their intentions, if there are intentions, right? So tell me more about the significance of empathy and what it takes, especially right now, to pull out empathy at a time when it's really, in my opinion, even harder.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad I remember your comment in that session, but it was in a short moment, and I really wanted to learn more about what exactly struck you. So I'm really glad you reached out and that we're having
Mm.
this conversation. When I got the
Yeah.
questions, I was like, oh, now I understand. Um, I think what I'll say is that empathy is vital, and I get that it feels contradictory. The focus of this work of inclusion should be centered on supporting minoritized or underrepresented people in workplaces or in community or in schools. And so it's like, if that is true, then why are we showing leaders empathy? Because they have a lot of power. And I think what I have come to believe, and the reason why leaders trust me, and this is in part because of what they've shared with me, is that if I don't show a leader who I am working with, if I don't show a leader that I am coaching empathy, then I'm not going to be able to hold them accountable, because we're not going to be able to build the trust in our relationship that is going to allow them to hear the accountability feedback that I need to give them. So empathy feels contradictory when we are doing this work of including people in our community that have not had access to opportunity and who have been minoritized in workplaces and school settings and in other environments. And we have to have empathy both for those people and for leaders. And the reason that I say this is that if I cannot show empathy to a leader who is working with me to tackle this intention action gap, it is going to be hard for them to trust me and to be able to hear me share critical feedback about things that they are doing, behaviors that they have, systems that the organizations have that are creating this disconnect. And so the empathy it's the key to the relationship. And then that relationship is what allows me to give the kind of feedback that's going to help them to grow and to change. I also believe that when we can when we can figure out how to have that empathy for them, we're also practicing having empathy for somebody who is situated differently to us. And we can also then, we can use curiosity as a coaching tool to then help them practice that kind of empathy for people in the organizations who really need it. And so it's a way to build trust, and then it's a way to model how we want them to lead.
That's very meta. Very meta. Have you ever been in a situation, and I'm asking because I have, so I'm curious what you would say about this, but have you ever been in a situation where the expressed intent has been stated, and yet it is clear that the leader has too much difficulty empathizing or understanding a different perspective, and then you, therefore, are having a hard time empathizing with the leader? Also, very meta question.
Yeah. Yes. And I was speaking with Shauna, who's on my team today, about this question of practicing empathy with somebody with whom you really don't want to practice empathy. I think it can be really hard when people are choosing not to see that they are behaving in a way that is harmful. And I mean, we have built into our contracts, and now I'm talking so much like a lawyer, we have built into our contracts with our clients the ability to, I mean, you can always get out of a contract, but we have specifically built in these provisions that let our clients know in advance that if we are feeling like they are not open to the change that they have said that they want, that we will step away. And there are times where we have had to have conversations with clients about that tension that arises and an impasse. And sometimes that hard conversation is what they need to, continue forward. And there are times where we say, we can't continue. And because our resources are limited, our reputation is also on the line. And so sometimes the leader isn't ready for the work, and it can actually be harmful to people within that environment who want more for the work to continue if it isn't going to have the impact that is desired.
Yeah. Well, that easily lends itself to the other concept of courage. And yet again, another kind of meta question, right? It takes courage for you to say, hey, I'm not sure we're going anywhere with this. And we either have to change direction or we're going to have to leave this contract. And it takes courage to then, as the leaders, step up and say, you're right. I need to step up. We need to be doing something differently. Tell me more about how you lead around this combination of empathy and courage, because it almost seems like you have to sort of volley back and forth between those two.
Yes, these times call for both empathy and courage. And, I have empathy for leaders. And we may have talked about this on that meeting that we were on. I mean, right, the closer affinity you have to the federal government, the greater risk you bear. And so I can understand why people who are with that kind of proximity are being more risk averse. And I think it's a time where we need to be as courageous as we possibly can. And given an empathy, a way to show empathy for folks who are bearing more risk is for those of us who are safer, or, I don't know that there is a safe, but, those of us who bear less risk should be more courageous. And so I think I'll add that it's a time for courage, it's a time for empathy, and it's also a time for community. We've seen a failure of courage in and sort of a lacking of empathy people could have received in this isolationist approach that many people are showing to this work, right? Like we're not telling anybody about it. We think that's protective. We're making our best guess at what we should do. And because we're not moving forward together, we're actually not protected. And so I think we need to be showing the courage to talk more, to collaborate more in finding solutions that are actually going to be protective of us. And I think the other piece of the empathy that I haven't spoken to that is worth, I mean, that should be named is, leaders who are worried about making payroll are feeling pressured to do things that aren't aligned with their values. And I can empathize with how scary that feels. I mean, as a small business owner with a team of people who had a horrible 2025, I mean, I completely empathize with how hard it is to worry that you're not going to be able to pay people. And so I want to have empathy for that person. And I also want to figure out how I can help them be courageous. Because I think sometimes we need a little push to be courageous. And so maybe empathy can be the way to it. Sometimes accountability is going to be the way to it.
I appreciate that you added and mentioned community, because many of us feel alone in having to be courageous or having empathy or stepping up. And the reality is it's hard to ever do that without a community, without people saying, I got you, I'm right there with you, I'm experiencing the same thing, I'm going to try this, what are you going to try?
Yeah, I think it's really, really hard.
Yeah. And so then when you're working with leaders, are there ways you're thinking about how to build that community for them so that they're able to more comfortably step into the courageous piece?
Yes. So I think that one of the things that I have been doing is building private communities. So I think for especially again for those organizations that bear more risk in the present moment,
Yeah.
the external communication is what's riskiest. And so I believe that there's a lot of work that can continue to be done within organizations. And so we want that work to continue. I think the work in between organizations, it's not going to happen I mean, it never did, right? Nothing happens through a press release. That's not how you build community.
Mhm.
But the courageous conversations that we need to have are not going to happen on a stage at a public conference. The courageous conversations need to happen in carefully facilitated spaces that are private where people can have the courageous conversations that are necessary. And so I'm definitely creating some private spaces where leaders who are in my circle can gather and figure out, what are the solutions that they can find together? How is it that they can lead either more courageously within their organization or together? And I think that's really, really important. Yeah, really, really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is part of why I built the Tower Scope Leadership Academy. In addition to all the other things that I do, is, having a safe space to talk about the hard things. And I agree with you. That's needed more than ever within different industries and spaces and that kind of thing. So, with all of that, where do you think all of this is going? What gives you hope right now about leadership?
What gives me hope is how many people are reaching out to find community,
Mm.
and how many people are thinking creatively about how they continue to do the work. So I think there are people who are not moving work forward, who are waiting to see, but the people who are moving work forward are using a lot of creativity to find solutions. And I think that creativity is going to help all of us in the long run. I also think that there was little hope last year. And I think some of that is, I was also processing, the stress of what we were facing as a leader myself and as a team. This year, I am seeing a lot more interest in the work and in finding ways forward. And
Interesting. That's great.
I
Mhm.
mean, it looks different than the work looked before, but there is interest, and so that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the way that you've created your framework really speaks to the you're accessing and helping people access their humanity. Like you're not there. Some of the programs, and I think there's been a backlash against those programs, have been so like punitive or corrective or overcorrective. And that doesn't feel good. It doesn't go along with the empathy piece. By you sort of like incorporating the empathy piece in addition to the courage and the humility and all of the other elements in a way that it's about like, well, we all want to be better people. And it's harder to do that when we're constantly criticized for how terrible we're doing at trying to be better people. Right. So I think there's also some of how you've created a program that is both accepting, supportive, and challenging us to grow and improve and be better people as we want to be.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So, if people are interested in your assessments or, your work, how would they find you? Where would they go?
So our website is promotinggoodllc.com. You can take our free snapshot Cultivate Leadership Assessment right there. And then if you want to get the full report, you can, buy it, and sign up also for the 360. I'm on LinkedIn as Valerie Zolezzi-Wyndham. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram. You can learn more about our programs on our website. I love a DM on LinkedIn to just start a conversation, and because that's where it starts, right? Not we're Promoting Good isn't going to be the organization for everybody, and there's a lot of good people who are also doing this work. And so reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation, and if it's a match, I'd love to work with you. And if not, I'll send you to the right expert, because there are a ton of us doing really good work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so everybody, what did you take away? And more importantly, what's one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Valerie? It could be just taking her assessment and getting some insights, right? Share it with us on LinkedIn. You heard she and I are LinkedIn, so we could cheer you on. If you enjoy the this episode, you know my love language. It's referrals, recommendations, and nice reviews. And you can leave a review of the hard skills on your favorite podcast platform or on my new YouTube channel at Dr. Mira Brancu. If you're looking for more personalized support, exploring the Leadership Academy and beyond, you could go to gotowerscope.com to schedule a consultation. Otherwise, together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side with Valerie Zolezzi-Wyndham and with me today on this journey. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. And until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great day.